Hey, what's going on, guys? Kevin Yates here, Yates Performance Training, and just kind of finishing up my training for the day here today, and wanted to share a little bit about how to rehab injuries faster with neuro training, because this is something that I've been mentioning in other videos that I've done, and I just wanted to lay the groundwork, I guess, a little bit more, mostly because, pain and injuries, that's an area I am beyond familiar with. I dealt with my share of, nagging aches, pains, and chronic, recurring injuries for years, and well into my 30s and into my 40s, and went through kind of all of the conventional kind of methods that were taught, that we need kind of, more stretching, right? If we're struggling with our mobility, we're told that we need to stretch more. If we we have pain around a certain area, low back pain, shoulder pain, knee pain, we're given strengthening type exercises, right? You need to strengthen up the muscles around those areas, with the thought process being that as we make those areas stronger, that the pain will go away and we'll feel better. And I worked in 8 different physical therapy clinics over a period of 3 years. So I've been through kind of the rehabilitation setting. I've done it myself and I worked in it. So I got to see it from 2 different perspectives, and it wasn't until a very serious shoulder injury back in 2002 where I could not lift my arm overhead anymore. And that went on for months. And, I spent 3.5 hours in a physical therapy clinic with the top 2 therapists there, and they literally were scratching their heads because they knew that I didn't tear anything. There was nothing as far as they could see that was injured, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And so, they really didn't know what to do to help fix my shoulder, So this is something that, I've had a long history with. I have worked with more clients than I can recall over the period of the last 20, almost 24 years now, who struggled with nagging aches and pains in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and older, and could not resolve them with conventional methods, stretching and strengthening and whatnot. So, and it wasn't until when I really started to piece the puzzle together, when I started to learn applied neurology. And that just, suddenly things made sense, and I started to notice changes in my body happening a lot faster. It's not that I didn't get any kind of pain relief or results from stretching and strengthening and, and doing certain corrective exercises. But the thing is that when that's all that we're doing, they can work, but they don't always work. And if they do work, what I've seen is that it tends to take a lot longer. So, you go and, if you're doing some kind of physical rehabilitation, or you're doing corrective exercises, strengthening, stretching, whatever it might be, a lot of times, we're waiting weeks or months before we really see a significant change, right? Before we start to see our movement improve or our pain decrease. And so it just takes a really long time if it does work. And sometimes it doesn't work. And on top of that, the changes that we do get, or the benefits that we do get, it's like we have to do a lot more work. We have to do more repetitions. We have to keep this going, on and on and on, because if we don't, we lose it, right? And we lose it fast. So, what I started to notice was that when we change it around and we work right through the brain and the nervous system, what we're doing is we're working with the highest governing system in the body that's capable of making the fastest change. The changes happen immediately because the brain and nervous system work like that. And the changes that happen tend to stick longer. So, we don't always have to keep doing the same things over and over in the same amount just to maintain the results that we get. So that's what I noticed. So I want to talk a little bit about, some of the ways, that to rehab injuries faster using neuro training. because I really do, or I really have seen some significant results happen, in myself and with people I've worked with over the years. So, getting back into that, one of the things that neurotraining will do is it helps to clarify kind of what we call the movement map, quote unquote. And what that means is that, when we have pain, a lot of times we have movement dysfunctions, right? That might just mean that maybe you're a little more stiff. Maybe you have some kind of joint restrictions, muscle tightness, or just overall you don't move maybe as well as you did back in the day. I mean, look, as we get older, right? We tend not to move as well. We sit more, we drive more, right? We're not doing as much physical activity maybe as we did back in the day. For me, I was an athlete back in the day, and so keeping up with that and trying to maintain a decent amount of mobility is not the easiest thing, especially if you're sitting at a desk, working long hours, and doing things like that. Have family obligations and whatnot that, you're trying to keep up with. And, it just leaves, sometimes it kind of puts things on the back burner. And before we know it, it's like we're stiff, all the time. We don't move well. We got joint issues going on, tendinitis, bursitis, whatever. So one of the things that neurotraining does for movement dysfunctions, when we got issues like that going on, is it clarifies what we call a movement map, meaning that we have within the brain, the brain is basically responsible for movement. And the brain has this kind of, we can call it like a map. It's almost like, I describe it more like having a menu of all the kind of the wide range of movement or movement patterns or whatever that certain areas of the body are capable of. But what happens is that, if we have pain or an injury, or if we just don't use certain movements, or if we have things like what I call threat, just basically inputs that are coming in that the brain perceives as threatening, it can shut down some of that movement map, or sometimes it could shut it all down, just depends. So what happens is like having a menu and you have fewer items on there that you can order. And it's like a menu of movement where we don't have access to all of the movement patterns or ranges of movement that we normally would have at a particular area or a joint of the body or joints of the body. So that movement can get shut down. So when we work with certain areas of the brain that are responsible for that movement, it's like we clarify that movement map and the brain understands that, oh, okay, I can access this movement because it's safe. And that's what our brain is always looking for, is safety. If there's anything that the brain perceives as threatening, it will shut down movement to that area. It'll also shut down strength and increase sensitivity to pain because the brain perceives that it's not safe to move that area. So that's what we tend to get. So clarifying that movement map is one way that we not only regain access to movement, ranges of motion, or certain movement patterns that we may have lost, but as movement improves, pain typically starts to decrease. So the two do go hand in hand. But again, it's not always enough to just stretch an area because it's kind of like working at the far end of the whole brain and nervous system. Yes, it does send input to the brain and everything, but it does it in a way that's like working at the farthest end and the slowest end, and it takes the longest to see any change. And sometimes we don't really see a whole lot of change just by doing things like stretching. So not saying stretching's bad or anything, but just that there is a difference when we work with the brain and the nervous system. So the second way that we can rehab injuries faster using neurotraining, or the reason why it happens, is because it decreases threat. And so what I was just talking about with threat is that basically, we are getting input to the brain and nervous system constantly all day long, whether we realize it or not. And when there's input that comes in that the brain perceives as dangerous or threatening to our survival, then it reacts by shutting down movement, decreasing strength, and increasing sensitivity to pain. Because again, the brain perceives threat. And where there's a threat in a certain area of the body, it doesn't feel safe enough to move it. So what we have to do is decrease that threat. And in order to do that, what neurotraining does is it allows us to get a better idea of what threats the brain is dealing with. That way we can work on removing them. And the more threats that we remove from what I call the threat bucket, right? When that bucket fills up, the more we can kind of decrease the threat in the bucket, then the less pain we tend to feel. And again, the more, the better that we move. And, if we're trying to go work out and exercise and do these things to, improve our mobility or get stronger, build muscle, lose weight, get in shape, things like that, it's a lot easier to be able to do those things when we don't have pain holding us back all the time. So decreasing threats, another thing. I already talked about the brain and the nervous system being the fastest governing system of the body, capable of the greatest change. And the changes, the one thing that you'll notice when you do neurotraining is that you will see results immediately on the spot. You don't have to wait days or weeks or months to see if what you're doing is working. So it is a big time saver. The brain and nervous system respond immediately to change. And so when we do a drill through a model of what I do is assess a certain movement, and then I'll do a neuro drill, and then I'll reassess that same movement pattern. And if that movement pattern improves, that's the brain giving feedback and the nervous system giving feedback that, yes, I like this. I feel safe enough to move. And we notice that because when the brain perceives safety, then it increases movement, it increases strength, it increases performance, and decreases pain. So that's how we always know what's going on with the brain and nervous system, and if what we're doing is having a positive effect or a negative effect. If I do a neurotraining drill and the movement, when I reassess it, gets worse, then I know exactly what my brain doesn't want and what areas of the brain I'm not going to be working on, because that starts to make things worse. So we can always know where we're at with neurotraining. And that just carries into, with neurotraining, being able to identify which areas of the brain are, and it tends to be either they're just underactive, meaning that the area is just not working as well as it should, so it needs a little more stimulus, or it could be inactive, meaning that it's really just kind of shut down, and so we really have to create a lot of drive that system, right? Drive and input to that system to get it to kick in and start working again. Or it could just be overstimulated. Sometimes we have certain areas of the brain that are just so overly stimulated, and it has negative effects as well. So it can, again, increase pain. So sometimes we have to do what we call inhibition work to kind of bring that system down and bring it back in balance. So just some things I wanted to share with neurotraining. So pain and injuries and things like that, especially as we get older, the chronic type of pain and whatnot, I think the big takeaway here is that pain and injuries, or I should just say pain, but pain it's not driven from the muscles. So just because our back hurts doesn't mean that we have a back problem. It doesn't mean that the pain is coming from the muscles in our back. Shoulder pain does not mean that the pain is coming from the shoulder. It's coming from input to the brain that says, hey, there's a threat here in the system, in this area of my shoulder. So let's make sure that we don't damage it. So the brain is going to send a signal to shut all movement down, or as much movement as it can. It's going to decrease mobility to that area. It's going to shut down strength and increase sensitivity to pain because it doesn't feel safe moving that area. So that's kind of the thing, stretching and strengthening exercises. Yes, they have their place. Yes, we need to be doing, exercises and stretches and things that they are important, but without dealing with the specific areas of the brain that are driving the pain and shutting down the movement in the body, what happens is that the stretching and strengthening work we do really takes a lot longer and doesn't produce the same results that we would be getting if we work specifically with these specific areas of the brain that are driving pain into the area of the body that we feel it in. So hopefully that makes sense. And that's just kind of the main thing that, if you are dealing with nagging aches, pains, recurring injuries that just never seem to get better, you've tried everything, exercises, stretching, maybe you've got x-rays and, the doctor doesn't find anything wrong with you, there's nothing in there, or you've been told that this is all in your head, hopefully this sheds a little bit of light into that. It's not all in your head, but it is in the brain. But being that it's in the brain, we can work with the areas of the brain that are either underperforming or overstimulated or just need a little bit of help, and through that can help resolve those issues that you're dealing with. So neurotraining definitely is something that I would suggest looking at, and that's it. So when it comes to pain and injuries, it's time to look a little bit deeper and start looking at where the real root of the problems lie. It's not in the muscles and the joints of the body. It's in the brain and the nervous system.